An American, and especially as you've pointed out on this rather important anniversary day, it is meaningful to discuss the relationship between citizens, civil society, and government. And I realize that today's discussion is not about American history, but it is about a principle that transcends any one country. That a free society depends upon citizens remaining free to support the causes and communities that they believe will advance the common good. Now, I lead an organization, as you mentioned, that serves one of the fastest growing segments of American institutional philanthropy, which are called donor advised funds. And today there are nearly 4 million donor advised fund accounts in the United States, which have over $330 billion in charitable assets. A figure, by the way, that has doubled just in the last 6 or 7 years. And these accounts distribute approximately $75 billion annually to charitable organizations. So they're not small by any stretch of the imagination. Now, Donors Trust stewards more than $1.5 billion in philanthropic assets. And last year alone, our account holders recommended more than $420 million in grants to organizations both within and outside the United States. And as you said, our mission is simple to ensure that individuals remain free to support the causes that reflect their values, and if they so choose, to do it anonymously. Now, today is not the mechanics about how that works, but it is about that defining feature that they all share, which is that the donor has the option to make a charitable gift anonymously, whether that gift is $100 or 100 million. And the public need not know who made the gift, and in many cases, the receiving or charity does not know either. Now, that single feature is the principal reason why donor advised funds have grown so dramatically. It protects not only the donor, and also the independence of the charitable sector itself. Now, before I mention why this matters, it's worth remembering that philanthropic freedom is not something that is automatic in society. Like every liberty, it survives only if it is actively defended, which is part of what today's conversation is about. From America's founding came the principle that government is limited, that citizens possess inherent rights that government exists to protect, not to create. And that philosophy eventually found expression in American law when the United States Supreme Court established the enduring principle that charitable gifts benefiting the public are not gifts to government, and nor do they become government property. And over 100 years later, another landmark decision reinforced that principle when the state of Alabama demanded that a civil rights organization disclose the identities of its supporters as a condition of operating within the state. The Supreme Court rejected that demand, recognizing that compelled disclosure threatened freedom of association and free expression. And that remains an important legal principle today. Now, these examples are American, but the underlying principle is universal. A healthy democracy depends upon citizens both being free to associate, organize, and support the causes they believe advance the common good without unnecessary government intrusion. So, why does donor privacy matter? Well, first, private giving is deeply, deeply rooted in many of the world's major religious traditions. Christians are taught, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. And similar principles exist within Judaism and Islam. Charity is intended to reflect humility, compassion, and devotion, not public recognition. And for many believers, compelled disclosure is not merely inconvenient, it is a serious interference with the sincere practice of their faith and a violation of religious freedom. Secondly, donor privacy protects the nonprofit itself. An independent charitable sector functions best when organizations pursue their missions without regard to who funds them. When a charity does not know who recommends a particular grant, it cannot consciously or unconsciously favor that donor or feel obligated to cultivate future gifts. Privacy creates a healthy separation between those who support charitable work and those who actually do the work. Now, in many respects, this independence explains the remarkable growth of organizations like mine. The grant that comes from sponsoring organizations rather than a named account holder allows charities to focus on their mission rather than their benefactors. So, greater donor privacy ultimately strengthens a more independent and a resilient civil society. And third, donor privacy protects both the wealthy and the ordinary citizen. The public often imagines philanthropy as the work of large foundations or billionaires. And in reality, much of American charitable giving, comes from millions of individuals making modest gifts. Privacy is valuable to the successful business owner who wishes to shield employees and shareholders from political pressure arising from her personal charitable decisions. And it is equally valuable to the widow in a small town who quietly leaves her life's savings to support a local ministry or community program, or simply wishes to be left in peace. In both cases, charitable giving is a deeply personal act. It is not the government's role or the public's to demand an explanation simply because someone chose to help somebody else. And fourth, donor privacy protects people from real harm, which I know is part of the conversation today. Now, I know this not only as an advocate, but from personal experience. Because of grants made through Donors Trust to organizations that some activists oppose, my family and I have received threats serious enough to frequently have off-duty police officers stationed outside my house, and I have had to have personal security when attending various events. My children and my wife have paid a price simply because others disagreed with the lawful charitable choices of my donors. Now, that experience reinforced a simple truth. When disclosure is used as a tool of intimidation, it is no longer about transparency. It is about discouraging lawful charitable giving by making the personal cost too high. And increasingly, political actors, activists, and segments of the media use donor disclosure as a deliberate strategy to discourage lawful charitable giving by exposing donors to public pressure, economic retaliation, reputational damage, and even physical threats. Now, a widely known example many years ago was Brendan Eich, who became CEO of Mozilla. And after it became public that he had made a lawful 1,000 donation several years earlier in support of a Californian ballot initiative, he lost his position. Now, regardless of one's views on the underlying issue, his charitable giving became the basis for organized political pressure with professional consequences. If organizations like mine are compelled to disclose donor identities, I have little doubt that charitable giving will decline significantly, not because generosity has disappeared, but because many people would reasonably fear the consequences of being publicly identified. History teaches us that governments rarely begin by suppressing speech outright. More often, they make the exercise of freedom more costly. Compelled donor disclosure is one way of raising that cost. And finally, donor privacy matters because it preserves the proper relationship between citizen and the state. There must always be a principled boundary between the citizen and government. Privacy helps preserve that boundary. When governments or those seeking political advantage of some kind can monitor and expose citizens' charitable choices, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, and freedom of expression inevitably become less secure. Now, I would encourage policymakers to ask a simple question when proposals affecting philanthropy come before you. Will this policy make citizens more willing to support the causes they believe in, or less? And if the answer is less, then it is not strengthening civil society, it is weakening it. A flourishing society depends on citizens who are free to devote their time, their talent, and their dollars, or whatever the currency may be, to causes they believe will strengthen their communities. Governments should welcome that freedom, not supervise it. The strength of any democracy is measured not only by the integrity of its public institutions, but also by the independence and vitality of its civil society. When citizens are free to give, free to associate, and free to support the causes they believe in without fear, society itself becomes stronger. The principle to remember is that transparency is the obligation of government, but privacy is the right of all citizens.